Hello guys, welcome to my channel. Please like and subscribe my channel for more awesome contents. Let's start the video. Gabriel was hurriedly preparing herself. She opened her window, letting the cold wind enter her elegant, golden room. Today is her date with Issei. She glanced at the guidebook her brothers gave her, somewhat doubting if she should trust the book. Her brothers always tried to get her an awkward situation with Issei, so she didn't feel like this book is really going to help her. But she doesn't have a choice since she herself has no idea how. She looked at the mirror. She was wearing a dress which was golden and white, flat white shoes and an elegant golden handbag. She couldn't help but smile at herself, silently hoping that Issei would like her appearance. She turned to her 18-years-old form. Issei and Gabriel agreed that they will be on their 18-years-old form. Since they're full angels now, they can now alter their ages. Issei became a full-fledged angel when he became 15. A knock stopped her from staring at herself. She opened the door and saw her brother, Ariel. "Why died?" Ariel stuttered. Issei wouldn't be able to resist this. Not that he tries to resist. Ariel thought. "Good morning, Anie-sama." Gabriel greeted cheerily, hugging her brother. Ariel smiled warmly and hugged her back. "Good morning, my adorable little sister. Are you ready for your date with Issei?" he asked. Gabriel adorably looked up to wonder, "I guess. Don't worry. As long as you follow the guidebook Raphael and I gave you, your date would go smoothly." Gabriel nodded at Ariel. "Where's Issei?" "Line break out!" Issei shouted as he stepped away from Michael. They were training under the orders of the two heavenly dragons. Issei woke up early, or was woken up early when Drake's face suddenly appeared in his dream. Michael, who was panting, holding his light spear, blasted Issei away with light. "Issei, come on now. You demanded for me to not take you lightly, no? Well, I'm doing just that." Michael smiled calmly the whole time, sending shivers down Issei's back. "So that's the effect I give my enemies when I smile." Issei shivered again before raising up his cutlass and charging. Michael met Issei and countered Issei's cutlass easily before thrusting his spear, which Issei parried. The two training angels were being watched by Dulio, Griselda, and Raphael. A table that looked like the ones you see in the royal palace was placed beside the training ground. Dulio, Griselda, and Raphael decided that they won't pass the rare opportunity of Michael training Issei instead of making plans which Raphael kept destroying by either spitting on it or spilling tea. They were eating their breakfast while drinking coffee. Dulio closed one of his eyes when Issei barely managed to parry the thrust Michael made that was aimed for his throat. Griselda laughed at Dulio. "Don't worry, Dulio. I'm sure Issei wanted this to happen. He was the one who disturbed Michael-sama." "Griselda-sama, I know that. But Michael-sama could kill Issei." Michael twisted his spear and struck Issei's neck. Issei fell backwards, coughing. Michael pointed the tip of his spear on Issei's face. "You want me to take you seriously, right? Then stand up and fight me properly then." Issei glared and swatted away the tip of Michael's spear before thrusting his cutlass. Michael sidestepped before grabbing the flat of the cutlass and kicking Issei's hand which was holding the cutlass. When Issei let go of Ascalon, it changed into its regular, original form. Issei rolled aside, getting Michael's spear. He crouched low. The two have switched weapon now. Issei swung the spear sideways, attempting to break Michael's armor, but Michael blocked the spear with Ascalon. Issei planted the spear on the ground and launched himself off, kicking Michael square on the chest and sending him staggering back. Issei quickly approached Michael, but Michael was quick to regain his senses and pointed Ascalon towards Issei's throat as Issei pointed his spear on his throat. "I still win. I got you 2 times," Michael said as he grinned at the scowling Issei. Issei turned his head back and walked off. "Whatever, Baka Michael-sama," Issei said. They threw each other's weapon towards each other. Raphael suddenly stood up. "Issei, your date with Gabriel." Michael's jaw dropped and looked at Issei. "Why your date with Gabriel?" he asked. He slowly staggered backwards before fainting. Issei smiled. "That's 2 points for me, so nobody wins." Griselda and Dulio were shocked also. "You're going on a date with Gabriel?" Griselda asked, happy for the boy she considered her little brother. Issei smiled happily, yes. Dulio laughed, patting Issei on the back and, congratulations. Go take a bath and get ready. Uriel alerted me that Gabriel's ready. Raphael screamed. Issei tilted his head, alerted. That's not important right now. Go and take a bath, quick. Issei nodded and ran into his room. Raphael smiled darkly before laughing. Issei swiftly prepared himself for his date with Gabriel, having prepared the things he needed before he got out to train with Michael. Issei wore a tight red shirt, brown khaki pants and a Panama. He also took the coat he hanged. He was given money by Uriel and Uriel already planned and booked the things that needed to be booked. Issei stepped out his room, Ascalon being taken by Albion just in case they get attacked. Issei stepped out his room to see Uriel. Issei, Gabriel is waiting for you. Go pick her up. Uriel said as he patted Issei. Issei nodded and made his way towards the room of Gabriel. He knocked at the door, excited and nervous at the same time. The door opened, and Issei thought that he could die a happy man as he gazed upon Gabriel, who was smiling shyly at him. She had her beautiful long hair and twin tails that reached her waist. Her blue eyes stared onto his, a blush forming on both of their cheeks as they gazed upon each other. Time slowed down for the both of them, but the moment was ruined when a flash blinded the two. They looked at the side to see Uriel with a camera, so adorable. He said as he looked at the image. Issei's sweat dropped as Gabriel punched the screaming Uriel and was sent flying towards the end of the corridor. Michael was at the end of the corridor. Issei, how dare you date my sister without my permission? Michael screamed as he was hit by Uriel. They went through the wall. Raphael, who was sipping tea peacefully, looked up and sighed. I hate you both. He muttered as he got crushed by his two brothers to the ground. Gabriel was heaving as she stared at Issei, her face red. She bit her lower lip as she looked at Issei and his 18-years-old form. His hair was messy, but somehow, he still looked perfect. His eyes was clear blue and his smile was radiant. And his shirt was tight that you can see the outline of his six-pack. Gabriel scolded herself. What am I thinking? She blushed even more when she saw Issei was staring at her. Gabriel and Issei exited heaven and arrived at the city. Gabriel took out her leaflet. Issei looked at the leaflet. Their faces neared each other, making each other blush. Go.h here first. Gabriel said, getting distracted by Issei, who was breathing down her shoulder. Oh no. What is happening to me? Gabriel asked herself. Gabriel discreetly took out her guidebook. Okay, here goes nothing. Gabriel thought before opening the guidebook. It said, when you walk down the streets, grab hold of his hand. Gabriel's face was slowly filled by red. What is this? She thought, I should have not trusted those two reprobate. She gritted her teeth in anger. A warm hand cupped her face and turned it. The one who cupped her face was Issei, and he turned her face towards his. Their faces were so close. Is something wrong? Gabriel looked at Issei's perfect face, his medium-length hair swaying with the cold breeze. Gabriel's anger vanished instantly and instead was replaced by something else. And none. Gabriel said before looking away, blushing. Issei stared at her with concern, which made her blush even more. She stared at the guidebook. Damn it. Here goes nothing. Gabriel thought before lightly rubbing her hand to Issei's. Issei didn't notice it at all as he was looking around the city buildings, amazed. Gabriel gulped, before snaking her hand towards Issei's and held it. Gabriel was blushing profusely, feeling her hand holding Issei's warm ones. Now that made Issei's eyes widen, but he didn't pull away and instead blushed as he saw Gabriel staring at the ground shyly. Why is she acting like this? She's too beautiful before and now with this shy attitude. Issei thought, he still couldn't believe Gabriel was holding his hand. Partner, smell her hair. Trust me, I'm a certified dragon Casanova. Dreg said out of nowhere in his mind. Issei almost choked on his saliva. What are you saying, Dreg? He asked mentally. Just do it. Don't let your dreams just be dreams. Dreg screamed. Admit it. You dreamed of smelling her hair. You were dope. Issei growled. Shut up. Gabriel noticed Issei glare and growl, so she stopped walking and got in front of Issei. She reached up as Issei was taller than her. She took hold of Issei's cheeks and looked at him in the eyes. Are you sick? Gabriel asked. She didn't know what took over her, but she stared at Issei's eyes intently. Issei decided to do what Drake told him to do and took hold of one of Gabriel's twin tail, and he smelled it. It smelled like heaven. And it is the most pleasant smell, mind you. Your hair smells good, my princess, he said, his eyes to hers. He blushed instantly when he realized what he said. Ha ha. Way to go, partner. Drake guffawed mentally. He was blushing and so was she. Issei and Gabriel just kept looking at each other until someone cleared their throat. They looked aside to see a man in a police uniform. I'm sorry, ma'am, sir, the police officer began, but you are gathering quite the crowd here, he said as he gestured towards their surroundings. Issei and Gabriel looked around to see people around them, taking pictures and muttering, they're so perfect, that guy's so hot, or oh my god, she's so beautiful. Issei became wide-eyed and blushed even more when Gabriel leaned on his chest and hid her face there. The flashes became more continuous and Issei's blush got a lot evident. The police officer face-palmed. Officer, please help us, Issei asked as Gabriel kept hiding her face on his chest. The officer sighed. Please. We are just a normal couple. Issei realized what he'd just said and blushed even more. The officer sighed. Yeah, right. You two are just an unusually attractive couple, he said as he shook his head. He used his baton to clear a path for them to go through. Thank you, sir. The officer smiled. Take care of your girl there. To find someone as attractive as her is like finding a needle in a haystack. The officer smiled before requesting for backup to clear the large crowd they created. Issei held Gabriel protectively. When someone tries to take a picture of them, he quickly hides somewhere. Either an alleyway or a payphone booth. Issei, I bow down to you. You are now the greatest opportunist in romance. Really used a couple to describe both of you. Issei blushed. Shut up, Drake. He got laughter as response. Gabriel looked up to him. I'm sorry for hugging you suddenly, Issei. It's just that, there was this embarrassment. I'm used to be seen by the public, but, with a boy, I just felt the urge to hide and you were. Gabriel didn't continue as she saw Issei smiling at her, so she smiled back. You have such a lovely smile, my princess. Gabriel blushed. Why do you keep calling me that? Gabriel asked bashfully and hit him on the chest playfully. Let me explain that. Issei considers you his princess ever since he became an angel. Albion suddenly said. Issei glared at his arm. Why you? Gabriel just smiled at Issei, a slight blush on her cheeks. To his surprise, Gabriel hugged his right arm. Well then, my charming prince. Let's go to our destination. Issei blushed. He stared at Gabriel, who leaned her head on his shoulders while hugging his arm. You want to go to the bookstore, my lovely queen? Gabriel playfully looked at him and smiled. Very well then, my handsome king. Issei opened the door and looked at the map Dulio gave him. They walked. This time it wasn't awkward. It was playful and sweet. The people walking looked at them. Perfect couple, they said as they stared at the two. But the two didn't mind their stares and instead cherished the moment. They arrived at the bookstore, a glass door that opens automatically. The design of the bookstore was that of a modern cafe. The floor was wooden and the bookstore smelled of coffee. The bookstore played some relaxing tunes. Of course there were many bookshelves. In the very middle you could read the book you bought. On the very side just beside the counter, they were selling coffee. There was a metal staircase that led to the second floor. The walls were adorned by famous lines in famous books. They had this abstract-looking lights that hung from the ceiling. When they walked in, a bookkeeper approached them. Good morning. Her jaw dropped as she saw the handsome man with whitish blonde hair and blue eyes who was wearing a tight red shirt. He's so perfect, she thought, and she gazed upon the beautiful girl that made Snow White make a run for her title. She had blonde hair, twin tails that reached her waist, and at the back of her head was her hair which wasn't tied, it reached her back, just below her butt. She also had blue eyes and both their skin were paled, so their blushes were evident. Because the bookkeeper didn't finish her line, the readers and the staff looked her way and saw the two new customers that entered and were also mesmerized. "Issei, they're staring at us too," Gabriel whispered. Issei smiled. "Now you know how Dulio and I feel when we're in school." Gabriel pouted at him, making him smile. Since Gabriel kept her gaze on Issei's face the whole time, when she looked at the bookstore, she was instantly enamored. Issei looked at Gabriel's fascinated face, finding it amusing as Gabriel skipped towards the bookshelves. "Good morning to you." Issei greeted the enthralled bookkeeper, flashing his knee-weakening smile before walking to where Gabriel went. Issei noticed that most of the shelves were full of novels. So he decided to check upstairs. He found manga, light novels, and a lot of educational books. He kept looking around until he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. The book was pretty small, maybe it's as big as his palm. Issei tilted his head and took a look at the title, The Submissive Maid. Issei read. He heard the two dragons chuckle. "What's this?" he asked his partners. None of them answered and just kept chuckling. He couldn't open the book because it was wrapped by a plastic cover. He turned around to see Gabriel, who was blushing. "There you are, Gabriel. What is this?" Issei asked as he gave Gabriel the book. Gabriel couldn't speak. "You're interested in this kind of things, Issei?" she asked. Issei rubbed his head. "Well, no. I don't even know what that is." Pointing at the book. Gabriel sighed in relief. They felt a presence and looked that way, and an old woman was looking at them, staring daggers. "Kids these days," she said, wagging her finger, disappointment in her eyes. Gabriel shrieked, "You're getting the wrong idea here." But the old woman didn't look at her and left the bookstore. Gabriel sighed, before blushing. To do this with Issei? She thought as she looked at the book. She groaned, "What's wrong with me?" Blushing profusely, she returned it to where it belonged and took Issei's hand, leaving the bookstore. The wind was a lot colder now. Gabriel shivered. Issei noticed this and smiled. He removed his coat. Gabriel rubbed her arms. She just received goosebumps as the cold breeze hit her skin. Her eyes went wide when warmth suddenly enveloped her. She looked back to see Issei smiling at her. Issei wrapped his coat around Gabriel, making a slight blush appear on her cheeks. "Take my coat. I wouldn't want my princess to catch a cold." Since they lowered their powers to that of a human to avoid making the nervous system of ordinary humans to explode. "Thank you," she stuttered, before turning to him and smiling playfully, "My knight in shining armor." Gabriel and Issei smiled. She was hugging his arm. They started walking when Gabriel's stomach grumbled. "Sorry," she said. Issei laughed as she glared at him. "I'm hungry myself. Let's go dine somewhere. I heard there was this great restaurant that serves high-quality steaks. Want to try it?" Gabriel pondered. "I don't know." Issei pouted. "Come on, let's go," he said as he suddenly carried Gabriel bridal style. Gabriel's cheeks were pink. "Put me down this instant, Issei," she complained, but Issei just kept laughing. The people walking by stared at Issei, who was laughing and carrying Gabriel, who was blushing while flailing her hands wildly. Issei came across a woman's clothing shop. He laid Gabriel down, who glared at him, arms crossed. "Wait right here, my lady." Issei entered the women's clothing and instantly, he became the center of attention across the whole room. A lady, shopkeeper, approached him. "Good afternoon, sir. Are you here to buy your girlfriend a gift?" Issei blushed, "Kind of like that." Issei ran around the shop like he was in some kind of battlefield, until he found what he was looking for, a gold and white scarf. He went to the counter, noticing the women on the line eyeing him like he was some kind of food. The money Ariel gave him easily covered the expense. He ran out of the shop, to the sadness of the women. They even peeked outside the glass to see where he was going. Issei ran towards Gabriel, who folded her arms. "What took you so long?" she asked. annoyed. Now, Issei began. To the surprise of Gabriel, he wrapped a scarf around her neck. She was getting bothered by the passerbys who were watching them like they were some kind of a movie and the woman in the clothing shop who stared murderously at her. She gazed upon the blushing Issei who was smiling warmly at her while wrapping the scarf. She stared at Issei. She forgot about all the people who were watching them in her annoyance. Instead she blushed and bashfully smiled back. When Issei noticed her looking at him, he said, "What? I simply don't want my adorable queen to catch a cold," he said sweetly. At that moment, Gabriel was happy, remaining human as it is possible for her to catch a cold and therefore, Issei will do this to her. Gabriel scolded herself for such a selfish desire. But sighed as she couldn't lie to herself, she wanted that. Issei coyly held his arm out for Gabriel to grab. "My lady?" She happily hugged the arm. "Now let's go to that restaurant you were talking about." Gabriel leaned her on Issei's shoulder. "Why do you want to try that restaurant anyway?" "I was curious. My classmates always talked about it, only Dulio and I were the ones who couldn't relate." Issei and Gabriel arrived at the restaurant. It was elegant. They had these old pictures hanged on the walls. The ceiling had a very unusual design. It looked like the deck of the pirate ship, and the floor was wooden. The furniture was well designed. The crew was wearing pirate-themed costumes. The place was cold. It was fairly spacious. The place had many diners. "Let's go sit there." Issei pointed at the table near the window that was designed to look like a pirate ship. Issei and Gabriel chose what they came for in the first place, the steak. Within 15 minutes, the steak was served. It had carrots and mashed potato, as side dish. Issei gladly devoured the steak, but, in a mannered way, Issei closed his eyes, savoring the flavor. He opened his eyes to see Gabriel with a disgusted expression, poking the steak. "Gabriel, eat your food." Gabriel irked, but she covered her mouth in disgust. She scowled at Issei. "This is your fault. It's disgusting here." Issei smiled at Gabriel. "Even when she's angry, she's beautiful." Gabriel continued to complain. Issei smiled at this. Gabriel noticed this and glared. "You think this is amusing?" Issei sliced a piece of steak and shoved it into the mouth of Gabriel when she was going to have another outburst. Issei smiled. "I think you're beautiful." She was silenced instantly, chewing on the piece of meat. "Told you it was good." Gabriel took a slice of her own and ate it. She immediately spitted it out on the tissue. "It's not anymore," she said with fake sadness. "Can I have a piece of your steak?" she asked innocently, but her voice was rather coy. Issei smiled at this. "Very well then, my breathtaking angel." Gabriel lost in her own game as she blushed her reddest blush yet. She tried to respond but she only stuttered. Issei was smiling smugly, raising his brows in mock questioning. Gabriel frowned. "I was serious. You look beautiful, even knee-weakening," Issei said, elevating Gabriel's mood. Issei and Gabriel's met once again. The other diners couldn't help but keep stealing glances at the two. Issei was going to tell Gabriel something when a scream of distress silenced the whole restaurant. Issei and Gabriel quickly looked at where it was and saw a boorish, proud, and insensitive man was groping a young waitress, probably a part-timer. She was around the age of Issei. Her pirate clothes were forcefully opened and the man was openly groping her, making her cry. The guards rushed to the woman but the guy had friends that were waiting for the guards to near them. They broke the beer bottles on both the guards' head. Issei and Gabriel, of course angels couldn't just ignore what is happening, quickly approached them. "Leave her alone." Gabriel screamed. She was right behind Issei. The three were groping the waitress but turned their heads, looking at the both of them with one of the boorish man's friend leered at her. "Hey, babe. Wanna get down? I'm sure you'll have a fun time accommodating the size of my gun," he asked in a suggestive, stentorian voice that boomed across the room. The other one chuckled in agreement. "Yeah, leave pretty boy here and hang out with real men." Issei felt his vision redden. "How dare you!" Gabriel grabbed a nearby plate and flung it with pinpoint accuracy, hitting the man with the stentorian voice in the throat. Before the other one could react, Issei dashed forward and slammed the man's body to the table, breaking the table and the man's back. "Disrespect my princess again and I land you, degenerate." Gabriel was shocked to hear such belligerence in Issei's voice. She noticed he was shaking in anger. But at the same time she felt her heart jump when Issei slammed the man's body in anger because she, his princess, got disrespected. Issei grabbed hold of the waitress's arm and pulled her towards his chest. The waitress hugged Issei's chest as she cried. The boorish man tilted his head in anger. "You dare stop destiny from happening." Right after he finished, Issei punched the man in the nose, the weakest he could manage. He was instantly knocked out. Issei turned his back away from the knocked-out man. He looked at the man that disrespected Gabriel. He took him by the collar, and flung the man towards a nearby, empty table, breaking another bone and another table at the same time. Issei turned his back before deciding to throw one last punch on the man that disrespected Gabriel. Gabriel was wide-eyed. Issei can't hold in his anger. She was surprised when he flung the man into another table. "Issei," she thought, her heart was pounding. She noticed Issei was shaking in anger and he was gritting his teeth. Growling, he made his way to the perverted man. Gabriel, not being able to see Issei descend into anger, launched herself to Issei, hugging him. "That's enough, my sweet, brave knight," she whispered. Instantly, Issei shook his head, regaining his senses. He looked around to see Gabriel, a smile on her face, holding his hand. "It's fine, Issei," Gabriel said cheerily. Then she added, mischievously, "Control yourself. I wouldn't want you to fall because you got furious to someone who insulted me." Gabriel noticed the stares being given towards Issei and her. Issei looked around. The other diners were silent with what just happened. But Issei didn't mind them and picked up the crying waitress. He made his way to the manager who was staring with wide eyes. "Here, I broke 2 tables, and some. This should cover the damage." Issei handed the money after he laid the waitress on the chair. Gabriel was waiting for him at the exit. Issei smiled at her, can't help but noticing her coy smile. Gabriel grabbed his arm sweetly. "I didn't take you to be one to get protective." Issei's face approached hers, a cheeky smile on his face. "I just don't want my princess to be hurt or disrespected in any way." Gabriel blushed. She looked at her watch. "Issei, it's 11:15. The train departs on 12. Gabriel exclaimed. Issei's eyes widened. She took hold of Gabriel's soft, silky hands and dragged her. Gabriel didn't have a hard time keeping up with Issei and they eventually reached the train station. Gabriel pointed at their train. "Wait!" she screamed. The doors started closing. Gabriel successfully passed through the narrow door. Issei passed through also, but the hem got trapped by the closing door. Gabriel pulled Issei and ripped the lower part of his shirt. Issei's right torso can be seen. Gabriel took off Issei's coat and handed it to him, shivering when the cold air-conditioned air hit her skin. "Here." Issei smiled warmly at her, which made her heart flutter. He wrapped the coat around her. "It's cold. I can probably handle this since Tulio and I adapted to suppressing our powers already." "You still don't," he said, smiling. Their noses were 3 inches from touching. Almost all the female inside the train looked at Issei hungrily. He sat down beside Gabriel, who was glaring at the women, as if to say back off. Issei tilted Gabriel's chin, smiling. Now, I don't want you to fall just because you being jealous." Gabriel blushed, looking down the ground. Issei took the opportunity and opened his book. "Put your arm around her when you ride the train." "What the hell, Uriel Sama?" he thought, gulping. The 2 heavenly dragons were cackling. "You can do this, partner," Dreg encouraged. He blew up in frustration and annoyance. Issei breathed out, then slowly stretched his arm. Blushing, he pulled Gabriel to his chest. Issei looked down, seeing only the whitish blonde hair of his Seraph. He sighed, looking out the window, staring at the buildings and houses the train passed through. "Thanks a lot, partners. Now look at the awkward atmosphere," he thought sarcastically. He was about to break the silence when something wrapped around his body. He looked down, his cheeks heating up, the whitish blonde hair he grew to love, leaning on his chest. Gabriel hugged his torso. Issei laid his head on top of hers, smiling at the scent. He felt the stares being given to them by the other passengers. With his enhanced senses, he heard others talking at each other. The majority topic was about them. Issei looked at his watch. It was 1:30. The sky was covered with clouds. The train stopped. "Gabriel?" he asked softly. "This is our stop." She didn't move an inch. "Gabriel?" Issei tilted her chin softly. She was peacefully, silently, and rather cutely snoring. Issei smiled. He picked Gabriel up bridal style and walked out of the train. Issei noticed the area was empty. He took the pocket map out of his pocket and looked where the hot springs is, 3 blocks from here. He thought, looking at the sleeping Gabriel. He moved his arm to form a more comfortable position for Gabriel. He closed the buttons of his coat which Gabriel was wearing. As he made his way to the hot springs, raindrops started to fall from the sky. "Shoot!" Issei muttered, speeding up. He took off his Panama, placing it on top of Gabriel's face. "Wouldn't want you catching a cold on our date," he said, as if Gabriel would be able to hear him. The rain intensified, making Issei run, but he could only go so far as to walk faster since Gabriel might fall. The springs were near. Issei took cover in a bus stop, catching his breath. He didn't lay Gabriel as the seat was dirty. He sneezed. "Looks like I'll be the one catching a cold," he thought, chuckling. He stretched his body before breaking for the hot springs. The person that welcomes customers that enters the hot spring saw him and got inside, before coming out with an umbrella. He was waving his hand. The rain intensified even more. "Sir, get under my umbrella," he said. Issei noticed Moss is struggling to fit the 3 of them under the umbrella. Issei smiled back. "No, I'm fine. Just make sure to cover her. That's all I want, I'll be fine." The man nodded. They arrived at the hot spring. Issei was soaking wet, while Gabriel was sleeping soundly. The man and Issei looked at each other before laughing. "Name Issei Hyoudou," Issei said, holding his hand out. The man looked like he was around 40, white hair and kind smile. The man shook it. "My name is Masa Akagi, owner of this hot springs. I gotta say, that was pretty rad what you did there for your wife," he said, putting the umbrella inside a bin. Issei smiled. "Anything for her." Issei smiled at Gabriel. "My father reserved the room for us, Ariel Hyoudou?" Issei asked, keeping his laughter down, although a part of him jumped when he called Ariel his father. Masa's eyes widened. "Yes, here's your keys. I'll lead you to your room." Issei followed Masa, who went down the left corridor. The hot springs theme was a mix of traditional Japanese houses and modern houses. Their footsteps were heard as they walked down the wooden corridor. The whole place smelled of vanilla. "I'm guessing you used the train to get here?" "Yep. Here you go," he said. The door was different from the other sliding doors. It was more elegant. Masa opened the door, as Issei can't since he was carrying Gabriel. The door closed. Issei removed his coat from Gabriel and laid her on the bed. Issei smiled as Gabriel was dry, and still sleeping. It's probably because she's adjusting. Like how Dulio and Issei had a hard time trying to wake up their first days as weak as humans. He sneezed again. He rubbed Gabriel's forehead. "Sleep well, my princess," he said. It was 2 p.m. Issei removed his half-torn shirt, then took off his wet pants. He entered the bathroom, hanged his wet shoes and socks. His Panama and his wet coat was also hanged together with his other clothes. Completely naked, he saw the coffee maker that was above the table beside the bed. He made one. He sipped the coffee, looking out the windows to the dark skies. Issei placed his cup of coffee down before looking through the wardrobe to see towels only. He sighed. "Of course I forgot to pack some clothes." Issei sneezed again. Laughing at himself, he finished his coffee before sitting down the couch and sleeping. Gabriel opened her eyes. "Issei?" she asked. She suddenly stood up, in a battle stance. "Where am I?" she asked herself. The last thing she remembered was wrapping her arms around Issei. She blushed before looking around. Issei. She entered the living room, hearing someone snoring. She saw Issei, who was naked. Gabriel's face flushed, turning her head to the side. Why is Issei naked? Gabriel saw Issei's clothes hang. She approached it, studying the clothes. It's wet. She saw Issei's coat and panama, which was wet also. She touched her clothes, completely dry. What? She wondered. She exited the room. Masa noticed Gabriel exit. Ma'am, I see you're finally awake. Welcome to the hot springs. Gabriel's eyes widened. How did I get here? Masa barely heard Gabriel as the rain was so loud. Masa approached her. You see, you're asleep. I noticed your husband, Issei, carrying you. You were wrapped with his coat and he covered your head with his panama. I quickly took an umbrella and offered my help. As soon as I stepped out, the rain intensified, so I hurried towards you both. Unfortunately, we didn't fit, so he stepped out of the umbrella so the both of us can fit under. He told me to make sure that you won't get wet, and that's all he wants. Masa said, smiling. When we got here, I noticed he was shaking, but he never dropped you. Gabriel's eyes were wide and they were watery. The old man smiled at her. Now that, you never find that kind of man every day. Imagine carrying a girl 3 blocks away from here while keeping her dry against the strong rain while your clothes are half torn, wet, and cold. What a man. Gabriel returned to her room to see Issei gone. Where? Someone suddenly grabbed her at the back roughly. She maneuvered herself skillfully, countering. She landed on the man who she flung on the bed. It was Issei, wearing nothing but a towel to cover his waist. He was smiling warmly at her. You got me, he said as he raised his arms in surrender. Gabriel blushed when she noticed that she was sitting on top of Issei's waist. Issei sneezed. Gabriel felt her heart wrench. Issei, I'm sorry. Issei's eyes widened. Gabriel started to cry. I'm so sorry. Issei hugged her, rubbing her back. Gabriel felt so comfortable when Issei hugs her. Issei leaned his head on hers. Don't worry, Gabriel. I did that for you, so don't cry. To sleep like that is normal since you're adjusting your power levels. Even Dulio and I had a hard time. But anyways, don't worry, my lovely date. He sneezed. Let's just enjoy our time with each other. Gabriel sniffed on his chest. I'm sorry. I said don't be. It was my choice. He said. He leaned his forehead to Gabriel's. Gabriel nodded, going to the bathroom to start drying Issei's clothes when she turned reluctantly when Issei sneezed. I'm okay. Relax, Issei said as he noticed Gabriel staring. Gabriel nodded, still reluctant. Issei sighed. Drag? Albion? He called his dragons. No one answered. Looks like they decided to hibernate again. He stood up, going into the bathroom. He noticed Gabriel was acting strange. She didn't have her beautiful smile which she always has on. Gabriel, don't be sad anymore. He hugged her. Gabriel didn't look at him. Issei scowled before sighing. He kissed her on the forehead. Feeling better? That was a kiss from an angel. He smiled cheekily. Gabriel's heart fluttered and she couldn't help but smile. She looked at Issei, who returned her smile. Issei carried her bridal style. To her surprise. AHH. She screamed. She hugged Issei very hard. Issei. Put me down. Issei didn't look at her and laid her on the bed. It's 2:30, you want to go take a look at their hot springs? He offered. Gabriel excitedly stood up and took a towel of her own out from the wardrobe. Let's go. Issei and Gabriel saw 2 doors, female and male hot spring. Sorry, but looks like we split up here. Gabriel pouted. No we don't, you're coming with me. She said, her tone said to not argue with her. Issei tried to walk to the boys but Gabriel pulled his ear and threw him in the girls. He stood up, shaking his hair. Gabriel, come here you. Gabriel giggled, before pretending to be afraid. Issei started to chase her. Issei stopped and gulped when he realized that the other girls were staring at him hungrily. Gabriel suddenly jumped on him, making them both fall. Issei screamed as Gabriel tried to get on top of his shoulders. Issei surrendered and the both of them settled down on the corner. Issei smiled, "It's so warm," he thought happily. But he got even happier when Gabriel leaned her head on his shoulders. Issei wrapped his arm around her neck, leaning his head on top of hers. Issei felt something soft encase his other arm and opened one of his eyes. He jumped when he saw a black-haired beauty was provocatively wrapped her breast around his arm. He pulled his arm away. Gabriel growled. "Hey there, handsome," she greeted. Her eyes fluttered. The other women started to gather around him, seducing him. Gabriel was releasing a deadly aura, but only Issei saw that. He raised his arms. "Please, I'm a married man," he said. At this Gabriel blushed. "I'm married to the beautiful angel, Gabriel," he said as he wrapped around an arm around her. As the other girls stared at Gabriel, their confidence dampened. Although they're beautiful, they looked like cockroaches when compared to Gabriel. But the woman with black hair didn't stop. "This girl is your wife. You're too good for her, let me show you how it's like to date an equal," she said confidently. Issei was going to shoo her away when Gabriel hugged him. "Please, a slut like you couldn't possibly be his equal," she said, her brow twitching in anger. She pulled Issei's arm and led him outside the hot spring. "I hate that girl." Issei suddenly breathed on her neck. "Well, someone's jealous." Gabriel blushed. "I'm not." Issei rolled his eyes. "Yeah, right. Lying is not allowed, right, my beautiful angel?" Gabriel blushed even more. "Fine. I was jealous," she said, crossing her arms and looking to the side. Issei smiled at this and tilted her head towards his face. "Well, then. I want you to know that I'm yours and yours only, forever and for eternity." Gabriel, wide-eyed, smiled. She was as red as a tomato while Issei was blushing also, asking himself what came over him. "What the hell? Really?" Gabriel asked softly. That snapped Issei out of his thoughts. "I'm serious," he began. He held Gabriel's hand. "I'm yours and yours, alone." Gabriel and Issei had small blushes on their cheeks, staring at each other's eyes intently. Gabriel saw Masa walk towards them both. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Hyoudou. I'm sorry to interrupt your he. At this the both of them blushed, but dinner is ready. A man that looks a little older than them was beside Masa. He was a bit shorter than Issei. He had black hair and gray eyes. Masa caught the both wondering and smiled. "This is my son, Takeo Akagi." At this, Takeo smiled at them kindly and held his hand out. Issei and Gabriel shook it. "My wife has done the cooking." He smiled, "which means the food is very good." Issei and Gabriel followed the father and son through the hot springs. They climbed up the stairs. The whole second floor was a dining area. Takeo gave Issei some clothes. Luckily, it fitted him just right. The food was a mix of Chinese dishes and Japanese. Takeo, Masa, and his wife sat down with the two angels. "Let me introduce to you my beautiful wife, Aya Akagi." A silver-haired woman stood up to shake hands with them. Her back was slightly curved and her skin was a bit wrinkly. "So is this the young man you were talking about, Masa?" she asked then, a kind voice a grandma uses to talk to her grandchildren. Masa smiled. "Yes he is, dear." Aya squealed. "What you did for Missy Beautiful here was just sweet," she said. "It kinda reminds me of how Masa saved me from freezing in one certain winter." She hugged Masa who hugged her back. Takeo smiled at his parents. Issei and Gabriel ate happily, listening to the babbly old couple tell the memorable memories they had. Issei blushed when he attempted to steal a glance at Gabriel but found out she was also glancing at him. The two heavenly dragons were still sleeping. Issei ate a piece of beef, chewing on it while smiling. He felt a smooth hand tilt his face. Gabriel was looking at him funnily. She picked up her napkin and wiped the side of his mouth. "Issei," she said, laughing. Issei rolled her eyes but he was smiling. Both of them had slight blushes on their cheeks. The couple and their son stared at the two who were being lovey-dovey. Gabriel eventually noticed their staring and blushed, looking down. Issei also noticed her and drank his soup, acting like nothing happened. The old couple stared at them. "Now, aren't you two just perfect?" she said. After that, Issei and Gabriel thanked the old couple for the food, and headed to their room. Gabriel walked towards the window, staring at the starry night sky. She looked back to see Issei removing his clothes, to her surprise. "What the hell are you doing, Issei?" she said. She covered her eyes with her hands but she peeked a little, before closing the gap she made. Issei smiled at her. "What? I just don't want to wear another guy's clothes when I sleep with you tonight." Gabriel blushed. "Issei, you're gonna sleep beside me? And naked?" she asked, her face hot. She closed her eyes when Issei removed his pants. "Why not?" Gabriel looked to the side. "At least wear clothes." "I'll be wearing an underwear." Gabriel glared, sighing. She rubbed her forehead. "Although a part of me is excited," she thought before sighing. "I just don't want wearing another guy's clothes when I sleep beside you tonight," Issei said. He walked in the bathroom to take a shower. Gabriel sat down the bed. She removed her own clothes and wrapped a towel around her. "Luckily, looks like her brothers sent some clothes for her to wear," then she glared. "And they didn't send Issei some stupid brothers that wants me to fall," she said in her mind. She kept fuming until Issei walked out of the bathroom, a towel around his waist, his hair messy but still looks good, his eyes glinting with happiness and his smile, so innocent yet so intoxicating. Gabriel wants to scream in frustration. "Why, Ani Salma?" she asked. Issei sneezed, continuously this time. It seems like his cold is getting stronger. Gabriel walked up to him, with only a towel wrapped around her. Issei looked at her and blushed, holding his hands up. "Please, princess. Put on some clothes." Gabriel, wide-eyed, blushed before smiling coyly. She walked up to Issei. "Now you know how I feel," she said in a voice that made Issei crazy. She smiled before frowning. "Oh, this is all Baka Ariel's fault. Now my lust is getting the better of me, seducing an innocent angel. What have I done?" Gabriel thought in a corner, making Issei confused. "Are you okay? Are you sick or something? I swear I protected you from the rain," he asked, rubbing her back. Issei left her in the bathroom and closed the bathroom door, giving Gabriel some privacy. Issei scratched the back of his head. He removed the towel. He was patting himself dry when the door opened. A woman with brown hair suddenly covered the eyes of the little girl she was holding hands just now. Issei screamed, covering his manhood. The woman nodded approvingly. "That's pretty big," she said, making Issei blush in embarrassment even more. Gabriel left the bathroom, with only a towel around her, concern in her face. "What is it?" she asked before turning her head and seeing the woman. "Oh." The woman bowed her head. "I apologize for intruding," she said before closing the door. Issei quickly wrapped the towel around his waist and Gabriel bathed swiftly. Issei opened the door, the woman and the little girl entering. Now Gabriel was able to take a look at the two. The woman looked like she was around her late 20s, wearing a gray shirt and jeans. Her skin was paled, her hair was hazel brown, and her face had a sad smile, which bothered Gabriel very. The little girl she was holding hands with, who Gabriel presumed was the woman's daughter, was wearing a gray dress. She was holding a teddy bear. She could tell that the girl was 8 years old, perks of being an angel, telling the age of children. But which bothered Gabriel the most was, the little girl had lost her virginity. Issei and Gabriel sat on the two comfy chairs while the woman and the little girl sat on the couch. Issei stood up to make some coffee while Gabriel entertained them. Issei returned giving the little girl a lollipop instead of a coffee which she took gladly. "Who are you?" Gabriel asked. "My name's Rita Aki, this is my daughter, Tara Aki." The four of them talked for a while. Issei kept looking at Rita's face. "I know I saw that face before, I just can't remember where," he thought. Rita?" he asked. That caught the attention of Gabriel and Rita, who were laughing. Tara was snoring on the lap of her mother. "Yes?" she asked, a kind smile on her face. "Why did you come in our room in the first place?" Issei asked, wary. Being the host of the two heavenly dragons had its downside: you'll get chased and killed for your gear. Luckily for him, Dragon Albion merged with him. Killing him will not do any good since the dragons are with him. But being with one of the SEREPHs, not only that but the Seraph was the most beautiful woman in heaven. Now that's crazy. Who knows? Maybe this woman is a fallen angel that is set to surprise us and get us off guard. He was ready to lunge himself to Rita. Rita looked at him, intently. Issei tensed up, before falling down in surprise. Rita started to break down. Gabriel stood up and hastily hugged her, rubbing her back and shushing her to not wake the child who was sleeping. Issei quickly apologized as Gabriel growled at him. The woman stopped her. "No, it's not his fault," she said. Issei sat down his comfy chair. Gabriel remained beside Rita, who was sniffing. "Issei, you don't remember me? You saved my child and I from the island, along with your twin brother." She wiped her tears away, sniffing. Issei's eyes widened. "Now I remember," he said. He took out his handkerchief and offered it to her, which she took gladly. Gabriel, while rubbing Rita's back soothingly, was looking at the both of them weariedly. Issei gulped as Gabriel stared at him questioningly. He never told her what happened in the island. He also begged the three Seraphs to not tell their sister. Issei started to cough and wave his hand discreetly, trying to get Rita's attention. "What happened?" Gabriel asked. "Issei and his brother saved us from the island of fallen angels, where we were raped by fallen angels and ghouls," she said. Her voice was breaking. "Even children as young as 6 years old were raped," she said. She started sobbing again. Issei felt anger as he remembered the horrible scene he saw when he freed the women and female children. Gabriel stared at her in shock. She gaped as it dawned onto her. So that's why Tara isn't a, she thought, her eyes filled with terror. "We saw your battle with the ghouls and the fallen angel. I'm so sorry. You got beat up to buy time for us to gain distance from the island," she sniffed. Issei hugged the crying woman. Gabriel pulled the sleeping Tara gently and stood up. She gave her space to Tara so she could sleep properly. "It's okay. That is the duty of angels. We simply couldn't just watch while you were getting harassed by those garbage." Issei felt the woman stop sobbing. Issei sat back to his comfy chair. He felt pity for the mother. He couldn't blame her for suddenly breaking down. She was made a play toy by those ghouls, breeding tools. And to top it all off, your own daughter getting raped in front of you, as young as 8. Issei gripped his fist, anger burning in him. He remembered the sight of the sobbing children, as young as 6. Their torn clothes and shaking bodies. Issei scowled. "Don't worry, Dulio and I exterminated those garbage. I'm sorry I wasn't able to take down the leader, but we exterminated those rapist freaks," he said. Gabriel involuntarily yawned. "Sorry about that," she said. Wide-eyed. Issei and Rita looked at her, before chuckling. "Thank you, Issei. If not for you, then I would have killed my own child just for her to be relieved of the torture she was being put up to." After we escaped, it took me a hard time making her respond to simple gestures. Sometimes at night, she even cried and screamed. "Stop!" she always yelled. Her father was killed in front of her eyes trying to protect us. Now I'm being forced to take his place in leading our company," she said. She looked at her sleeping daughter. Also, her screaming was rare now. She stroked her daughter's cheek. Issei swallowed a lump in his throat as the pity in his heart was gonna burst. "It's getting late now, Issei. Thank you for giving me your time. I apologize again for barging in so suddenly. I'll leave you two alone now." Rita smiled at them with genuine happiness. She was going to wake her daughter, but Issei held her hand. "I'll carry her to your room." He picked the sleeping girl up, gently. He was trying to avoid waking the girl up. Gabriel opened the door for the two of them. Rita thanked Gabriel before walking towards her room, which was 3 rooms to the left from Issei and Gabriel's room. Rita unlocked her door. "Thank you for this, Issei," she said as Issei walked inside the pitch-black room and navigated his way towards the bed. He laid Tara down the bed, cringing when the bed squeaked. He held his breath when Tara swiped her hand to nowhere in particular, groaning. Her face had an annoyed expression on. He let his breath out in relief. "You're welcome, Rita-sama. Good night." Issei closed the door softly, before rubbing the back of his head. He entered his room, closing the door before stopping as he saw Gabriel, angry, sitting on the bed with only a shirt on. "You have some explaining to do," she said. The lights in the room were closed and only the moonlight was their source of light. It illuminated Gabriel's breathtaking face perfectly. Issei, despite the fear and nervousness he was feeling, blushed as he gazed at the beautiful angel he was going to sleep beside with tonight. He cautiously approached the bed, looking at the angel who was glaring at him. Her wavy, long, white blonde hair was flowing to her back. She removed her twin tails, laying her hair on her shoulders. Issei could have stood there all night and he wouldn't sleep as long as he was allowed to gaze at the ridiculously gorgeous angel. Issei slowly crept on the bed. He sat down in front of Gabriel, who was in an Indian sit. He also sat down Indian style in front of Gabriel. Issei resisted the urge to compliment her and tell her she's the most beautiful girl in his life. She crossed her arms. "Issei, what were Rita and you talking about?" "I can't relate," she said, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. Issei smiled pathetically before sighing. "I'm sorry, Gabriel. I didn't want you to worry. I can't just tell you that I almost died and it's no biggie. I'll look stupid then," he said. Gabriel had a blank look on her face. Issei didn't remove his nervous, pathetic grin he had. He grew nervous even more as Gabriel stared at him with a black expression. "Look, Gabriel," he felt something push him down to the bed. He looked down to see Gabriel's wet blonde hair. She was on top of him, hugging him. He was blushing. "Gabriel?" he asked nervously. He pulling her gently of him, but she didn't budge. Her arms were wrapped around his neck tightly. Issei's grin was replaced by a concerned, surprised look as he felt something wet on his naked chest. She was sobbing on his chest. "Issei, why didn't you tell me?" "Baka," she complained cutely, sniffing. Issei was frowning. "Great. Just great, Issei. You made your princess cry. I deem you unworthy of the title Dreg gave you," Albion said, making Issei feel bad. "I don't know what I'm going to do if I lose you." Issei's eyes widened, his heartbeat increasing. "I really mean that much to you?" he asked. His heart was beating quickly and his face was red. Gabriel slowly sat up, her face flushed. Tears were evident on the corner of her eyes. She was sitting directly on top of his stomach. She was wiping her eyes. Issei was going to apologize when she glared at him. "Are you crazy?" she asked, angry. "Of course I do. Baka," she said. She started to cry like a kid again and launched herself towards Issei, making him lie back once again. Issei smiled. He laid his head on the back of her head and wrapped his other arm around her body. "I'm sorry, my breathtaking princess. I didn't want to make you worried about me. Baka," she yelled half-heartedly, "I will always make time for you. Of course I won't be bothered if it's regarding you. Baka." Issei smiled at this. He stroked her hair, to Gabriel's surprise. She hid her face on his shoulders, blushing. She blushed even more when she realized they were hugging each other almost naked. Issei closed his eyes, smiling peacefully. He relished the warm feeling he was having as Gabriel hugged him. "Good evening, partner," Dreg greeted. Issei groaned. "Great. You're awake," he said sarcastically in his head. Dreg laughed. Now, no need to be grumpy. I have now perfected my trick for you. Hee. Issei grinned at this. "All right. So what is it?" Issei asked. His eyes suddenly grew wide when a magic circle appeared behind Gabriel's head, just where he was stroking her. Issei studied his arm. There were blue strings attached from his hand to the magic circle. I don't want to use this on Gabriel. He thought to drag frantically. What if the strings can slice through metal, or this was actually the strings you wrap around people you will offer to get stronger? Issei gulped. He thought of all the violent possibilities which made Dreg laugh in his head. Relax, partner. This trick is not that absurd. I studied this carefully, analyzing every person you have encountered. Clearing his throat before continuing, and usually, every man I have analyzed would kill for this amazing move. You'll totally make me your favorite dragon after this. Dreg finished smugly. Albion snorted, yeah right, more like the most hated. Dreg growled, shut up. Issei gulped, so this is 50-50, it can be good or it can be bad. I totally assure you it's good. Dreg yelled in his mind. Albion intervened in the background, his voice was like he was far away, totally not. Now, pull the strings, partner. Issei nodded at this, his breath slow. He pulled the strings the hardest he can. Rip. The sound going throughout the room. Issei looked at what he has done with a bored expression, having a hard time processing what happened, before he grew wide-eyed, looking away, blushing. The strings shred Gabriel's clothes, her bountiful breasts, her smooth, silky skin, her slim tummy were there to see. Sorry. Issei screamed. Gabriel was gaping, a blush on her cheeks. She immediately pulled the blanket on top of her. Pervert. Baka. She screamed. Issei growled as Dreg laughed in his head. Now I am your favorite dragon, right? He asked. Dreg. Damn you. Issei replied mentally, which made Dreg chuckle even more. Yes it is then. Issei stood up and offered Gabriel clothes, but then he slipped. He landed in between Gabriel's thighs. Their faces were suddenly so close to each other, their noses were lightly touching. There were blushes on their cheeks. Issei felt something soften between his palms. Soft, hot. What is this pillow? He asked himself as he started squishing it in between his palms. He never felt this kind of softness before. He looked at Gabriel who was biting her lower lips and was squirming. Are you okay? He asked, his head tilting in confusion. He didn't stop kneading the soft pillow. Issei. She muttered before moaning, my breasts. She managed to exclaim before holding Issei's shoulders roughly. Issei looked down, he saw his hands were holding Gabriel's breasts. Issei staggered back in surprise. I'm sorry, Gabriel. I didn't know. He added immediately. He held up his hands in surrender. Gabriel's face was flushing pink, her legs were crossed and she was breathing deeply. Baka. You pervert. She glared, half-heartedly. Issei walked towards her to apologize but his right foot stepped on his left, result of nervousness. He came and landed on Gabriel. Issei groaned. Issei, don't. She said, her eyes watery. I am an angel, you are an angel, we can't do this. She said. Issei's eyes widened, he quickly stood up and he waved his hand out frantically. No. No. You're exaggerating things. Gabriel puffed. I know you are growing a boy but at least control yourself, Issei. She said as a matter of factly. Issei sighed. Damn it, Dreg. He said weakly in his mind. Issei quickly opened the wardrobe. He took another shirt of Gabriel. This was dark green, it had a cupcake in the middle front. He handed it to Gabriel who took it gladly. She quickly put it on her. Issei reluctantly laid down the bed, looking at Gabriel who was staring at him, her cheeks blushing lightly. Issei sighed, looking away from Gabriel when he tensed up. Gabriel wrapped her arms around his chest. She leaned her head on Issei's shoulder. Issei looked at her but she remained smiling, her eyes closed. I'm sorry, Gabriel. He said before wrapping his right arm around her. I told you my trick was the best. Dreg, exclaimed to a disturbed Issei and annoyed Albion. An awkward silence descended to the room. Issei was getting nervous. Gabriel, who had her eyes closed, rose up and opened her beautiful, blue eyes. Issei. She said cutely. She suddenly tapped his forehead playfully. You pervert. She said giggling, her smile was a teasing one. She didn't let Issei reply and instead laid her head on his shoulders and hugged him tighter. Issei, who was blushing profusely, stuttered, "Gee, good night, Gabriel." Giggling, she hugged him even tighter. "Good night." She noticed her heart was thumping, and her face was hot. She glanced at the moonlit room, smiling as she saw Issei's wet clothes. She silently hoped that tomorrow morning, Issei's clothes were dry by then. She remembered what he did for her, and blushed. "Sweet dreams, my sweet knight," she muttered to herself, softly that only she can hear. Issei thought that she said something but waved it off. Line break. "Good morning, sleepyhead," a sweet, pleasant voice said. Issei groaned. It may be a sweet, pleasant voice compared to Dulio's annoying one, but the bed was just too soft to get up from. "Later," he muttered before sinking his head to the soft, fluffy pillow. He smiled at the feeling, before sighing as the person who woke him up, who he was presuming as Gabriel since her voice was like that, began poking him on the back. He half-heartedly opened his eyes, puffing. "Fine," he said as he rolled to the other side until he fell off the bed with a thud. He landed with his feet first. "Finally. I have been having a hard time waking you up," Gabriel said with a smile. Her golden hair was tied up to a ponytail this time. She was wearing a white, V-neck shirt, a whitish golden skirt, and white Vans. The scarf Issei gave her was wrapped around her neck. She was folding the blankets, humming a happy tune. The grumpiness instantly vanished to the surprise of Issei. The windows were open, the sunlight entered their room and lit it up golden. Issei pinched himself, making sure he is awake as he gazed upon the face of his dreams. "Good morning, Gabby," he said. He walked towards the window. Unlike yesterday, the sun was shining brightly today. The birds were flying and the plants were wet as Moses sprayed them with water using the hose. "What did you call me?" Issei, who was smiling at the scenario, changed his smile into a playful one. "Gabby," he said as he turned around to see Gabriel drop the blanket she was folding and was looking at him, annoyed. "I called you Gabby." His playful, teasing grin never left his face as he walked towards Gabriel, who was steaming, although a light blush was evident on her cheeks. Puffing, she turned away from him. "Then I'll call you sleepyhead," she said, a triumphant smile on her face. "Sure," Issei said nonchalantly. He made himself a coffee, smiling at Gabriel. Gabriel shook her head. "How about, savage pervert?" Issei almost spitted his coffee. He forced a smile on his face. "Sure," he said, strain in his voice. Luckily, Gabriel was too busy fuming than listening to him. If he reacted violently to the nickname, then that is what he would get. He silently thanked Dulio and Griselda as they were the one he observed whenever the two were arguing, and that is where he got that conclusion. Gabriel gaped, before growling. "How about beast?" Issei almost choked on his coffee, but still, Gabriel didn't notice this. "Relax, my gorgeous princess," he said smoothly, making Gabriel and him blush. "What is wrong with me?" he asked himself. Gabriel did a final half before picking up the blanket she dropped and started folding it again. He noticed that she was trying to hide something, so he walked towards her. "What is that?" he asked. He only knew that she was hiding something, he didn't know what it was. Gabriel started to mumble, an excuse presumably. Issei smiled at this. "What is that?" he asked again. Gabriel gave up and sighed. She picked up a black and white paper bag and looked at Issei straight to the eyes. Issei instantly lost his confidence as Gabriel's clear blue eyes bore onto his. She started to walk towards him, handing him the paper bag. "Find out yourself," she said, blushing. Issei laid down his coffee on top of the table near them before opening the paper bag. Gabriel, who was waiting in anticipation, watched Issei's eye movement. Issei, confused, picked out a light yellow long-sleeved white khaki pants. Issei laid them down gently on the bed. "Gabriel, what is this?" he asked softly. He knew it wasn't his birthday today. He waited for Gabriel to answer but grew impatient, so he looked at her, surprised. Gabriel's eyes were watery, and Issei knew she was about to cry. He held both her shoulders. "What's the matter?" Gabriel pushed forward, burying herself on Issei's chest. She began to sob, making Issei wrap his arms around her. "Hey now. Why are you crying?" he asked, a bit wary as possibilities and reasons began to flood his brain. She looked at him, smiling as she cried, "I'm sorry." She sniffed, wiping her eyes before continuing, "I woke up earlier than you and I checked your clothes. They still weren't dry yet and this wouldn't have happened if I didn't sleep." She cried before burying herself to Issei again. Issei resisted the urge to laugh. "Are you serious? The situation was that simple and you cried?" he asked, finding it humorous. His smile faded when Gabriel didn't stop sniffing and sobbing. "Hey, that's okay. Forget what happened. Really, you can't move on from that?" He gently but firmly removed Gabriel from his hug and looked at her. "Gabriel, get over it. See? I'm fine." Gabriel sighed, "I'm sorry. It's just, whenever I see those clothes of yours, I remember what happened." "Is that so?" Issei asked. Gabriel nodded. Issei held his hand out towards the direction of his hanged clothes. Instantly, a red magic circle appeared on his palm before the clothes were suddenly alighted with fire. Gabriel stared in shock. "Issei, what are you doing?" she asked, launching herself on him. Issei ducked, sending Gabriel bouncing on the bed. When she regained her composure, his old clothes which were hanged were reduced to ashes. She stared at the bathroom before looking at Issei, who was putting on the light yellow long-sleeved shirt she bought him. Issei was having a hard time putting on the shirt. It was too tight, but he didn't let it show since he would risk making Gabriel sad, and that is something he doesn't want to do. He managed to put the shirt on him and began pulling it down, relishing the warm feeling he received. It was very cold last night, but he didn't let that make him complain since Gabriel will be sad. He sighed in relief, closing his eyes in happiness and smiling. The fact that Gabriel gave him another gift was even better than the warm feeling he obtained in wearing the shirt. He opened his eyes to see Gabriel staring at him. He looked at her weirdly. "Gabby?" he asked. Gabriel blushed. It's nothing. It's just that, when I saw that shirt, I knew instantly that it would look perfect. But now that you're wearing them, you look so breathtaking," she said. She was surprised at what she said and looked down immediately, her face red. Issei was red also. He was caught off guard. Issei picked up the white khaki pants Gabriel bought and wore them. "Perfect fit. Have you been looking at my pants sizes, Gabriel?" he asked teasingly. Gabriel tensed up, her face got even more redder. Of course not. Why would I do such a, damn it, you got me," she confessed, making Issei laugh and her glare at him before freezing as she gazed upon the handsome angel in front of her. Gabriel pointed below the table. Issei looked at where she was pointing and saw a light yellow Vans. Issei quickly putted on the shoes. "Another perfect fit." "Well then, Gabby?" he asked, snapping the frozen angel out of her gazing. "Let's leave the hot springs now, shouldn't we? We still have 2 destinations left, lunch at the city and dinner in a fancy restaurant," he said playfully in a fake British accent. Gabriel giggled before hugging Issei's arm. "Let's go then." Masa, Aya and their son Takeo were waiting for them at the very entrance. Issei and Gabriel, who were getting lovey-dovey, suddenly blushed in embarrassment as they realized they were being watched. "Sorry, but you two just reminds me of the past," Aya squealed, hugging Masa, who was smiling at her sweetly. Takeo's sweat dropped, laughing lightly. Issei shook hands with Masa. "Thank you for everything, especially yesterday." Masa just smiled back at the young man. Issei and Gabriel waved back at the family as they exited the hot springs. Issei took one final glance at the hot springs' beautiful front. Its plants were shining. They were wet since Masa and Takeo just watered them. "Shall we?" Issei asked Gabriel, who smiled. "We shall," she said as she grabbed Issei's hand and skipped, pulling Issei. Issei watched his surroundings carefully. It was very suspicious. The city was still deserted except for the hot springs on the very end of it. His eyes narrowed, his grip on Gabriel's hand tightened. He waved it off yesterday. It's normal that there aren't that many people who would want to be outside when it's raining that hard. But now, the sun was shining and still, an eerie silence occupied the city. Albion? Issei asked in his head. When it comes to things about battle and strategy, he always consults the dragon. I know, Issei. Albion answered. I also noticed the unusual silence. I haven't sensed any heat signatures either. Until now. Issei tensed up with what Albion said, fearful for Gabriel's sake. But he knew in himself that if he is the angel's enemy, this is a very good opportunity to attack indeed. Gabriel looked at Issei in concern. He was looking around mildly and his grip was very firm, almost hurting. Is there something wrong, Issei? Gabriel asked, concern on her face. Issei looked at her. No, it's just nothing. Forget it. He said, his voice was strange. Gabriel decided to wave it off, not wanting to annoy Issei. She felt the cold breeze fly through her skin. She was about to say something when a tune resounded throughout the city. Issei jumped, surprised at the sudden sound. Gabriel giggled. Relax, it's just the ice cream man. See? She said, mockingly smiling at Issei who jumped. She pointed at the ice cream man who was biking. His ice cream box was attached to his bike and it had speakers which were the ones that were playing the happy, upbeat tune. Issei sighed in relief. So that's the heat signature you sensed? He said to Albion in his head. Do you want one, Gabriel? Issei asked, smiling at his date. I want vanilla. She answered in delight. Issei couldn't help but chuckle as Gabriel squealed like a child. Half-heartedly, he let go of Gabriel's hand, frowning. Gabriel noticed this and smiled. Don't worry. She said cheerfully. You can hold my hand after you butt the ice cream. Issei blushed. He was going to make a remark but Gabriel walked away from him, smiling playfully. He sighed, I'll get her back. Issei felt memories enter his head as he gazed upon the ice cream bike, memories before he became an angel. He started to walk towards the bike, getting distracted from the fuzzy memories. He gets these fuzzy, unclear memories from time to time. He didn't know what these meant to him before but he always feel a wave of sorrow every time these images enter him. The ice cream seller smiled kindly at him. Good morning, young man. Care to buy some ice cream for your date there? He asked, his crooked teeth showing. Issei smiled back. 2 vanilla, please. He said. He began to fumble his pockets for the small wallet. It may be small but even a wardrobe can fit there. It was Michael's gift to him on his 7th birthday. It has some magical properties that turns any item small and no matter how heavy it is, it becomes weightless. One time, Raphael entered his room then scowled as he disapproved messy rooms. He picked up the wallet and peeked on it. He got sucked in. Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, and Issei looked for him the whole day. In his panic, Michael almost sent all his angels to search the earth. Luckily, Issei accidentally stepped on his wallet and Raphael screamed. They released Raphael from the wallet, laughing at the grumpy Raphael. Issei laughed as he remembered the incident. The ice cream man smiled at him while scooping the ice cream. Remembering good memories, aren't we, boy? He asked, smiling. Issei smiled back. Yeah, good memories. Mind if I ask you a question? Issei asked. The man smiled at him. Of course not, shoot. Why is the city so silent? Since we arrived here, the only people I saw were the ones in the hot springs and you. The ice cream man paused, before giving Issei one ice cream cone. He began scooping another one. You don't know? The people here were driven out by something just 2 days ago. Some say terrorists, or uncontrollable pests. Some are a bit more to the supernatural side and says the ghosts of the soldiers who died here were the ones. He said before laughing, I honestly don't believe in those supernatural shenanigans. Crazy people. He added. Issei grinned. Oh, only if I can tell you're talking to an angel right now. Here you go. He said, taking Issei's pay and handing him the last ice cream cone. Now isn't that just kind? Your wife there is helping the kid left here by her family," he said, leaning on his ice cream box. Issei smiled and turned around, licking his ice cream. "Yep. She's just wonderful, isn't she?" He looked at Gabriel, who was talking to the girl that was wearing ragged clothes. Issei smiled at the sight before frowning. "I know that girl. I saw her somewhere." Issei thought. He tried to remember where he saw the girl before his smile vanished. He then began to run. Run as fast as he can. "I won't let you touch her, you trickster child," he screamed in his head. Gabriel looked at the girl and stroked her hair. "Don't worry. My husband." She paused, blushing, "And I will help you." Gabriel pitied the kid. "Being left by your parents is just terrible." She tried to stand up, but then to her surprise she was pushed by someone to the side. She landed down her butt. "Atatata," she muttered, rubbing her butt before feeling something wet drip down her face. She rubbed her face, then looked at her hand. Blood. She was wide-eyed. She slowly looked up to see a knife, a light-energy knife, run through Issei's hands. The ice cream cones dropped and Issei's blood dripped down the vanilla ice cream, tainting the white-colored ice cream. She immediately stood up. "Issei," she said in surprise. She was looking at the girl, who had a very dark and sinister expression on her face that replaced her kind and innocent one just a while back. Issei had an angry expression on his face. His gaze was directed to the girl, ignoring the extreme pain he was feeling from his stabbed hand. You're still alive?" he asked in anger. "How dare this fallen angel attempt to stab my princess?" He thought in anger, getting even more angry when the fallen angel that disguised herself as a child who stabbed him from the back smiled. "We couldn't just pass this opportunity up now, couldn't we?" the girl said before pulling out the knife roughly before slashing sideward. Issei jumped backwards quickly, barely able to dodge the slash. Gabriel, angry, sent golden light spear towards the girl. The spear impaled the girl to the ground, finally killing the bastard girl. Issei held his hand, hissing as his hand bled and the wound stung. Gabriel immediately ran towards Issei. "I'm so sorry, Issei," she screamed in panic. It was her first time to see Issei bleeding and therefore, shocked beyond belief. Issei looked at her warmly. He pulled her to a hug. "Don't worry, I've had injuries worse than this." The ice cream man suddenly roared, fiercer and scarier than those of a lion. He jumped towards them, transforming into a very long snake. The snake was similar to that of a black mamba, only it's a lot bigger than your average black mamba. It is easily longer than your football field. It only managed to fit in the streets because its body was coiled. Its eyes were red and its long tongue was dripping with red poison, or lava. The snake's scales were broken, in between the broken scales were glowing magma. "It's a volcanic serpent!" exclaimed Gabriel. It lunged forward. Issei and Gabriel know better than wrestling with this serpent, even if they could, since its poison is practically lava, only enlaced with venom that makes the pufferfish's venom put to shame. They jumped to opposite directions. Both of them rolled gracefully. Issei regained his senses quicker and materialized his cutlass. He jumped on the back of the great serpent and stabbed his cutlass. The snake shrieked and shook, trying to get Issei to leave his back, but Issei held firm. He looked at Gabriel, who was staring at an alley. Issei was able to see what was in the alley. Violet magic circles appeared. Out came fallen angels, to Issei's annoyance. He twisted his sword, making the snake shriek even more. He forced the snake to turn to that certain alley. The snake was forced to do so and spitted lava venom to the fallen angels. Issei winced as the fallen angels cried out in pain. Their skins burned, their wings burned, and even their bones dissolved. Gabriel opened her wings and flew up. Multiple violet magic circles appeared in the skies. Out came even more fallen angels. Issei pulled out his cutlass before opening his own wings and flying up beside Gabriel. "Gabby, you take care of the fallen angels, I'll help you after I kill this serpent." Gabriel nodded at this, materializing several light spears and sending them to the fallen angels who were caught off guard. Issei flew down, his cutlass pointed at the serpent who was looking for him, angry, When he was within 5 meters above the serpent, he twisted his body multiple times. He charged his sword before hitting the snake in the very middle of its long body. The snake shrieked. When the sword hit the snake's scaled, great light was emitted that made Gabriel and the fallen angels to look down his way. When the light faded, the snake was no more than a head, its tongue hissing a bit, before eventually stopping. Issei immediately charged above when a very large magic circle appeared in the skies. The fallen angels, Gabriel and Issei, were forced down the ground. The air was pressing down upon them. Issei looked to the side to see magicians, dark magicians, chanting some sort of spell that sounded like a mix of Indian, Greek, and Mayan language. Issei looked at Gabriel, who was perfectly holding out her own. Issei grinned at this, as expected from one of the serpents of heaven. He tut before charging the fallen angels. Gabriel sent light spears to the dark magicians, effectively stopping the pressing down of air. She launched off just in time to dodge the barrage of light spears sent her way. She materialized a bow on her hand, a golden one. She pulled back the strings and an arrow appeared. She released it and it went flying, leaving a trail of light. When it pierced the ground, it exploded, sending hundreds of rays of light to all directions, although it avoided Gabriel and Issei. A golden light engulfed the city, and when it faded, all that's left is the fallen angels' ashes and of course, Issei and Gabriel. Well, that explains why the city is unusually silent. Issei said. Gabriel looked at him, breathing deeply. Let's go to heaven, Issei. She said. She was disappointed that the date was to be postponed, but they had to report this to her brothers. Issei nodded, although disappointed. Right. Gabriel landed beside Issei, her wings folded back. When she landed, a violet magic circle appeared beneath her. Violet, sharp claws attached to a long tendril shot out from the magic circle. Gabriel's eyes widened. Shoot. She thought, accepting the fact that this is her end. She closed her eyes waiting for pain, but it never came. Slowly she opened her eyes and instead, she was in the air. Issei was carrying her up and he was bleeding badly. Issei. She screamed. She was struggling to break his grip but found out she can't. Magic circles appeared at random areas and 2 or 3 fallen angels came out from it. They slowly approached the two of them. Gabriel, run. Issei panted, blood all over his body. The claws were going to get her, but Issei carried her away and instead he was the one that got slashed. The fallen angels were chuckling darkly. We got Gabriel. Hee hee. Oh, it's gonna be a long night later. They said, lecherously. Issei growled at this and hugged Gabriel tighter. A fallen angel charged them at their backs, but a white slash appeared and the fallen angel turned to dust. A fireball was sent flying towards the fallen angels and they scrambled away. Issei and Gabriel turned around to see Masa in a traditional Japanese robe and was holding a katana, a holy katana. Beside him was his son Takeo holding a book of spells. Issei, Gabriel. I knew it, you were angels. Masa said, concern in his face as he saw Issei, who was bleeding profusely. Takeo raised his hands then brought them down. Lightning struck down around them, it surrounded them, keeping the fallen angels away. I am really an retired exorcist and my son is a mage. We sensed something different from the two of you but we ignored it. But, then we saw light emitted from the city and decided to check it out. He said grimly, it's a good thing we did. The fallen angels began blasting the wall of lightning Takeo made. He was gritting his teeth, having a hard time holding the wall. My shield won't last that much longer. Get ready to fight this Blackwing freaks. He screamed, panting. He collapsed down his knees and the wall of lightning faded. He immediately stood up and walked beside the trio. Gabriel materialized a thin sword in her hands, making a stance beside Issei. The 4 of them fought the fallen angels pretty well. They maneuvered themselves perfectly. They had perfect coordination, making the fallen angels retreat. Gabriel jumped in the light. Issei screamed, Gabriel. Beneath you. Issei ran forward, and pushed Gabriel out of the way. The dark magician remaining held out his hand and a magic circle appeared on his palm, Immediately 10 sharp and glinting harpoons shot out. Chains were connected on its end. It made a noisy clanking noise as it surged forward. Issei and Gabriel were in the way of it. Damn it. Issei thought. The least he can do is return Gabriel safe and used his body as a shield. But to his surprise, the harpoons impaled him not in his body but in his 10 wings. The magician smiled at this and raised his other arm. A yellow magic circle appeared on his raised hand and lightning rained down on him. The magic circle absorbed it and he sent the lightning surging through the chained harpoons. Issei screamed in pain. Gabriel was gaping in shock, her eyes wide in horror. Tears were flowing out of his eyes. Issei! She screamed. She tried to run after him but Issei blasted her with a gust of wind. Masa-sama. Please, please. Take her away. Issei screamed, before his eyes widened as a hand ran through his stomach. Hello, Issei. Issei smiled bitterly. Gabriel. He muttered before blood gushed out of his mouth. Gabriel screamed in horror and despair. Issei. She struggled, trying to break the grasp of Masa but Takeo casted a weakening spell on her. She could have easily overpowered the two but Issei used his remaining energy to weaken Gabriel. Gabriel saw Gabriel who was laughing darkly. I told you, dear Gabriel. I will make this angel here fall. Ha 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 ha. He laughed triumphantly. Issei smiled at Gabriel. Run, my princess. He managed to mutter, his tears flowing down his cheeks and blood trickling down his mouth. Gabriel cried openly. She can't bear to look at her Issei. His wings were being pulled roughly into the portal by the harpoons that sent electricity throughout his body. Gabi. He began, panting, leave me, please. Please, I beg you. Leave. He screamed. He saw the fallen angels start to gather. He didn't want them to take Gabriel. No. Please. I can't leave you. Gabriel screamed. Gabriel laughed at the two, amused. He bent down and held Issei's face roughly. Wait, I just noticed something. He said, before violently beating Issei in front of Gabriel while laughing like a psycho. Gabriel screamed in horror. No. Stop it. Her tears were flowing. Masa and Takeo kept pulling her away. Gabriel screamed in frustration as Issei smiled at her softly, before he got punched by Gabriel continuously. Gabriel, do you know what I'm going to do to this angel, here? He asked, his expression dark before he stepped on the chest of Issei roughly. Gabriel materialized a light sword in his hand. I'm going to do this. He suddenly screamed as he roughly stabbed Issei on the stomach. The fallen angels were laughing in delight as Issei screamed in pain. Gabriel painfully twisted his sword and pulled it out, and this. The sword transformed into a bat and he continuously hit Issei. And when he is about to die, I'll heal him to a complete recovery then torture him to near death again. Ha ha ha. He declared out loud, forcing a potion down Issei's mouth. Gabriel desperately struggled against Masa's grip, crying at what is happening to Issei. Issei. She screamed in desperation. Issei was near the portal now. Gabriel, take care of yourself. Promise me. He screamed, smiling gently at her before he screamed in pain as he got electrocuted and pulled in the portal. The fallen angels laughed as they entered the portal also. The skies were dark, and the city was silent once again. Masa let go of Gabriel who dropped to her knees, crying. Issei. She screamed, holding her hands out. She blamed herself. She was the Seraph yet she was the one who was stupid. Now Issei will be tortured for her sake. Because of her, Issei is